Welcome to a quiet night of ghostly tales. As the world slows down, we'll drift through haunted places and restless spirits, carried softly by stories meant to guide you into sleep. Do you believe ghosts are echoes of the past, or something still watching us now? Let me know your thoughts, and together, let's step into the whispers of the unknown. Tonight, our first story begins with a dinner no one attended, a meal that never truly ended, and the faint sound of laughter that has haunted a lonely traveler ever since. He had been driving for hours, the road stretching endlessly between dark trees and rain-slicked fields. The storm had started suddenly, thick sheets of rain that blurred the edges of the world and forced him to slow to a crawl. His headlights caught the outline of a wooden sign swinging in the wind. It read, "The Gables Inn." A warm light glowed faintly behind one of its upstairs windows. Grateful just to find shelter, he turned off the road and pulled into the gravel drive. The inn seemed strangely well kept for a place so far from town. Flower pots sat by the front steps, though the blooms were dry and pale, and the sign over the door still gleamed faintly despite the rain. Inside, the air was cool but welcoming. A single lamp burned on the counter, casting a pool of yellow light that seemed to reach only so far before darkness took the rest of the lobby. Behind the counter, a woman with silver hair looked up from her ledger. "Rough night to be on the road," she said softly. Her voice was kind but distant, as if it had traveled a long way to reach him. He nodded, setting down his soaked bag. "I just need a room for the night." She handed him a key. "Second floor. Last door on the left." The old stairs creaked under his weight as he climbed. The hallway smelled faintly of wax and lavender, and portraits lined the walls. Smiling faces from another century, eyes painted so vividly that he felt their gaze follow him as he passed. His room was small but tidy. A single bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the courtyard below. He could just make out the reflection of lanterns swaying in the storm. He changed into dry clothes, set his things aside, and sat on the edge of the bed. That was when he first heard it. Faint at first. So soft, he thought it might be the wind. A clinking sound like glass touching glass. Then came the murmur of voices, low and rhythmic, blending together in laughter and chatter. It sounded like a dinner party. Curious, he opened his door and stepped into the hall. The noise grew clearer. Cutlery against plates, a chair scraping lightly against the floor, a burst of cheerful laughter from somewhere below. The sounds were coming from the dining room. He made his way down the stairs, following the glow spilling through the archway at the far end of the lobby. The dining hall was lit by candlelight, dozens of small flames flickering across a long table dressed in lace and silver. For a moment, he thought he saw shapes, shadows of people moving around the table, raising glasses, gesturing as they spoke. But when he blinked, the room was empty. The chairs were pulled out, plates were set, and food sat steaming in the center of the table. Roast meat, bread, and bowls of fruit that looked freshly cut. He stepped closer, reaching toward one of the candles. It burned steadily, warm to the touch. The air carried the unmistakable scent of roasted herbs and wine. Everything looked ready for guests who simply hadn't arrived yet. He whispered into the silence, "Hello? Is someone here?" No answer. Only the soft ticking of an unseen clock. As he turned to leave, a faint giggle echoed from the corner of the room. It was light and childlike, quickly followed by the faintest sigh. Then, before his eyes, one of the glasses lifted slightly from the table, tilting as though raised in a toast, before falling still again. He froze, heart hammering. The laughter faded, swallowed by the hush that followed. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a chair, and hurried toward the staircase. Halfway up, he looked back. The candles were out, every single one. Only the moonlight through the window touched the table now, and the feast was gone, replaced by dust. and a thin sheet of cobwebs that had clearly settled long ago. When he reached his room, he locked the door and sat against it, trying to calm his breath. Maybe he was overtired, he thought. Maybe he had imagined it all. But when he lay down, the sounds began again. The faint echo of dinner plates, the rise and fall of distant conversation, someone humming softly right outside his door. He didn't sleep that night, he just listened. When morning came, sunlight spilled through the curtains. Everything looked ordinary, untouched. He packed quickly and went downstairs. The woman at the counter was still there, writing in her ledger. "You were right," he said, forcing a nervous laugh. "It was a rough night." She smiled faintly. "Did you hear them?" He hesitated. "Hear who?" "The guests," she said. "They always dine when the storm passes through." He stared at her, unsure whether she was teasing or warning him. "I thought the inn was empty." Her eyes softened, but she didn't look up. "It is. Has been for years." She closed the ledger slowly and turned the book toward him. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded. The last entry was dated 1924. "A long time ago," she said. "There was a wedding feast. The guests never finished their meal." The traveler felt the air grow heavier as the woman spoke, her voice calm but tinged with a weight that made his chest tighten. "They say the groom had fallen ill that morning," she continued, her fingers tracing the edges of the old ledger. "But he insisted the celebration go on. The guests gathered anyway. Laughter filled this place, music played, and toasts were made again and again. It was a beautiful night, or so I've been told. But when morning came, every single one of them was dead. Spoiled wine, they said, though no one ever found the bottle." He wanted to speak, but found no words. The woman finally looked up at him. Her eyes were pale gray, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw a candlelight flicker in them. "I shouldn't have given you that room," she whispered, closing the ledger. It was his. Before he could ask what she meant, a gust of cold wind rushed through the lobby. The front door creaked open, though no one had touched it. The light from outside was dim, clouded over. Somewhere above them, a door slammed. The sound echoed down the hall, sharp and final. He turned, looking toward the stairs, but the landing was empty. When he faced the counter again, the woman was gone. The lamp still burned, but the ledger lay open, her chair empty, rocking faintly as if someone had just left it. His throat went dry. He called out once, then again, but only the storm answered back. The inn was silent now, except for the faint hum of wind pressing against the walls. He backed toward the door, but something in him, some strange pull, made him turn again toward the dining hall. The curiosity returned stronger than fear. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe it was the human need to see what we cannot explain. He stepped quietly through the corridor, his shoes brushing over the worn floorboards. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke, though no fire burned anywhere. As he approached the archway, the sound began again, soft at first, then growing. Cutlery against porcelain, the rustle of sleeves, voices rising and falling in a rhythm too perfect to be random. But this time, the laughter wasn't joyful. It was strained, uneasy. When he peered inside, the candles were lit once more, though he had seen them snuffed out just an hour ago. Figures sat around the table, translucent, faint as mist. Their outlines shimmered like reflections in rippling water. A woman, in a white gown at the head of the table, lifted her glass, smiling at someone who wasn't there. Across from her, a man in a dark suit slumped forward, his face pale, eyes half open. The traveler's breath caught. None of them moved quite right, their gestures too slow, their smiles frozen in perfect mimicry of life. The same motions repeated over and over, like a memory stuck on a loop. He stepped back, and one of the figures turned its head sharply toward him. The face was hollow, blurred like smoke, yet he could feel its gaze cut through the air between them. For a moment, all sound stopped. The candles flickered wildly. Then a single whisper filled the room. "Join us." The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The temperature dropped so fast that his breath turned to mist. The smell of wine soured, replaced by something metallic and sharp. He stumbled backward into the hall, heart racing. The laughter began again, louder this time, echoing off the walls until it became unbearable. He ran up the stairs, two at a time, throwing himself into his room and locking the door. He pressed his ear against it, listening. The sounds were still there, muffled now, but persistent. The faint chime of glass against glass, the scrape of a fork, the rhythm of 100 unseen guests enjoying a meal that had ended a century ago. Hours passed before dawn began to lighten the sky. The storm was gone, but the air remained heavy with something unseen. When he finally dared to open the door, the inn was quiet. Dust hung in beams of morning light. The smell of decay lingered faintly in the corridor. He walked down to the dining room one last time, as if to prove it had all been a dream. But what he found made his stomach twist. The table was bare again, just old wood, warped with time. But at its center sat a single plate covered in thick dust. On it lay a tarnished silver fork and an empty wine glass filled with rainwater that must have dripped from the cracked ceiling. And carved into the table beneath it, faint but unmistakable, were the words, "Save me a seat." He staggered back. His hand brushed against the edge of a portrait hanging by the doorway. It showed the woman from the ledger, younger but unmistakable, standing beside a smiling groom. Behind them, a long table stretched out, set for a feast. He stared at the portrait for a long moment, trying to steady his breath. The paint had cracked with age, but there was something about the scene that drew him in. The woman looked proud, her hand resting on the groom's arm, the same gray eyes watching him even from the faded surface of the canvas. And just beyond them, in the shadows at the far end of the painted table, was an empty chair. He leaned closer. The detail was too fine for a painting so old. The carved pattern on the chair's back, the way the light caught the silver plate, it all looked too precise. Then, as he blinked, he saw something that made his heart jolt. There was another figure, barely visible at first, a shadow seated in that empty chair, its outline faint, as if it had only just appeared. He stepped back, shaking his head. The floorboards groaned beneath him. The air smelled of dust and old perfume. But when he turned toward the door, a faint sound drifted through the hall again, soft, melodic, like the hum of a lullaby. It came from upstairs this time. Every instinct told him to leave. But something in the song drew him back up the stairs, slow and cautious, one hand brushing the rail. As he reached the landing, he realized the melody wasn't random. It was a waltz, the kind played at formal dinners long ago. The same tune he'd heard faintly beneath the chatter the night before. It was coming from his room. He froze outside the door, listening. The sound was faint but clear, a soft hum, moving in circles, as if someone were swaying just beyond the wood. Gathering his nerve, he turned the handle. The door opened easily. Inside, everything was exactly as he'd left it. His bag by the bed, his jacket draped over the chair, but the air shimmered faintly, like heat above pavement. And then he saw it. The reflection in the mirror across from the bed, the table, the feast, the flicker of candles burning low. Only the room around him was empty. In the reflection, the same long table appeared again, but closer this time, as if the boundary between spaces had begun to dissolve. He watched, transfixed, as the woman in white raised her glass in a slow, deliberate motion. Then, one by one, the guests turned their heads toward him in the mirror. He stumbled backward, his heel catching the edge of the rug. The reflection shifted. Now the head of the table was empty. Only the chair remained, and it was pulled out slightly, waiting. He looked again, and his breath stopped. The faint outline of a man sat there now, his own reflection. The glass in the mirror trembled, as though struck by a gust of wind. A single crack snaked across it, and through the fracture, the scene seemed to bleed into the room itself. A candle flame flickered in the corner, though no candle stood there. A whisper rippled through the air, soft and coaxing. "You're late." He bolted. The hallway stretched endlessly before him, the air turning colder with every step. He could hear the sounds again, the clinking of cutlery, but now they echoed above and below, surrounding him. The scent of food, once inviting, now stung of rot and smoke. He reached the front door, yanking it open. The morning outside was gray and silent. He stumbled into the mist, his shoes crunching on the gravel path, his lungs burning with the cold air. The road was empty, stretching away into a fog that seemed to have swallowed the world whole. Behind him, the inn loomed quietly, windows dark and lifeless. No light, no sound. He could almost believe it had been abandoned all along. He turned back once more before getting into his car. The sign above the door swung gently in the breeze. The Gables Inn. The paint was chipped now, the letters barely legible, and the front door, still open when he'd fled, was gone. In its place was a wall of warped wood, boards nailed across it, as though no one had entered in years. He stared at it, heart pounding, mind racing for an explanation. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe he'd wandered into the wrong building. But when he reached into his pocket, something cold brushed his fingertips. A small silver key. The same one she had given him the night before. He turned it over. Faded engraving on the handle caught the morning light. Room 9, the groom. His stomach dropped. He left it there on the dashboard and drove until the fog thinned and the world began to look real again. But the sound followed him, faint and distant. Every few miles, when he turned off the radio or stopped for fuel, he could swear he heard the faint echo of glass against glass. Weeks passed. He tried to forget. He told himself it had been a hallucination, a trick of exhaustion and weather. But one evening, while unpacking his things, he found something that made his blood run cold. Folded neatly among his clothes was a napkin, embroidered with delicate gold thread. In the center was a name stitched in looping cursive, his own, and beneath it, written faintly in old ink, were the words, "Dinner begins at dusk." He dropped it instantly, his hands trembling. The scent of old wine filled the room, faint but unmistakable. Then came the faintest whisper from nowhere at all, soft, close, and patient. "We've kept your seat warm." He stood completely still, the napkin at his feet, the echo of that whisper fading into the corners of his quiet apartment. For a long moment he couldn't move. Every sound felt magnified, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, his own heartbeat drumming in his ears. But beneath it all, faint and almost imperceptible, was something else, a slow rhythmic clinking, like silverware gently tapping porcelain. He forced himself to move, to check every room. The windows were closed, the doors locked. Nothing seemed out of place. Yet the smell of roasted meat and red wine lingered in the air as if carried on a memory too stubborn to fade. He threw the napkin into the trash and stepped back, hands trembling. But when he turned away, he heard the faint rustle of fabric. The napkin lay neatly folded again on the counter, spotless and white. The gold embroidery shimmered faintly in the dim light. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time he began to drift off, he heard it again. Chairs moving, quiet laughter, the same waltz playing somewhere distant but close enough to feel. He tried plugging his ears, turning on music, anything to drown it out. But the sound wasn't outside. It was behind his eyes, in the part of his mind that refused to let go. By dawn, he decided to drive back. Maybe if he saw the place in daylight, he could prove to himself it was just a dream. He told no one where he was going. He barely remembered the road, only that it wound endlessly through hills and fields. The sky was pale when he finally saw the curve of the gravel path again. The Gables Inn stood where it always had, or where it once had. But this time, it was truly abandoned. The roof sagged, ivy curling up its sides. Windows were shattered, the door long gone. The wooden sign lay face down in the weeds, its name barely visible under decades of grime. He stepped carefully through the threshold. Inside, the air was cold and still. Dust coated everything, and sunlight spilled in narrow beams through the cracks. He walked through the lobby, half expecting the silver-haired woman to appear from behind the counter. But the counter was gone, and in its place was a pile of rotting boards. The ledger, if it ever existed, was nowhere to be seen. He wandered through the halls, following the layout he remembered. The smell of decay thickened as he approached the dining room. The archway stood, barely holding. The chandelier above was nothing more than rust and cobwebs. The table was still there, long, warped, its surface carved with scratches and stains. He stepped closer, running his hand across the wood, remembering where the feast had been laid. As his fingers brushed over the center, he froze. The words were still there. "Save me a seat." But beneath it, something new had been etched. The lines were shallow, newer than the rest of the marks. "We're still waiting." He stumbled backward, his breath shaking. The light dimmed suddenly, though the sun still shone through the windows. The shadows stretched longer, reaching across the table like hands. Then came the faintest sound. First one glass, then another. A chorus of soft chimes filled the room, echoing through the dust. He turned toward the door, but his feet felt heavy, as if the air itself were pulling him back. The sound grew louder, the laughter returning in fragments. A chair creaked. Another. The shapes began to form again around the table, hazy but unmistakable. "Dinner begins at dusk," someone whispered, right behind him. He turned slowly. The woman stood there, the same one from the ledger, from the portrait. Her gown shimmered faintly, her smile serene but hollow. "You shouldn't have left," she said gently. The meal wasn't over. He stumbled back, knocking into the table. The silverware rattled, the sound sharp as a bell. The figures around her began to lift their glasses again, their eyes empty, faces calm. "Please," he whispered, "I don't belong here." "But you came back," she replied, tilting her head. "That's all the invitation we need." The room darkened. The sound of rain began to fall, though the roof was dry. Candlelight flickered into existence along the table, burning low and red. The air filled with the thick scent of wine, sweet and sour, almost suffocating. He tried to move, but his body refused. A cold hand brushed his shoulder, firm and still. Then another. The laughter rose, swirling around him like a tide. The last thing he saw before the world faded to black was the woman lifting her glass, her voice cutting softly through the noise. "To our newest guest." When the morning came, the inn stood silent again, empty, dust undisturbed. Only the faintest scent of smoke hung in the air. Weeks later, travelers passing through the valley spoke of strange lights glowing in the windows of an old inn that no longer existed on any map. Some said they heard music carried on the wind, the sound of laughter drifting over the fields. Others swore that if you looked long enough, you could see figures seated around a table, their faces hidden in candlelight. And sometimes, on especially still nights, a new voice would join the chorus, faint, uncertain at first, then blending perfectly with the rest. The sound of one more guest, raising a glass to a dinner that would never end. In a quiet corner of the English countryside, there stood a manor so old that even the maps around it had begun to forget its name. Ivy crept over its walls in thick, tangled vines, and the stone steps leading to the main entrance were worn smooth by countless generations. Locals rarely spoke of it, and those who did often lowered their voices, claiming that at night the manor seemed alive with sound and movement that could not be explained. The Wainwright family, recently moved from the city, had heard none of these warnings. They were eager to escape the clamor of urban life, to find peace in the countryside, and to make a home among the manor's ancient halls. Their children ran through corridors lined with fading tapestries, laughing and shouting, while the parents admired the grandeur of the estate. It was during the first evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, that the manor began to reveal its hidden heart. The eldest son, Thomas, discovered a staircase in the library, partially hidden behind a false wall. The wood was dark and polished, the steps narrow and winding downward into the unknown. Curiosity overcame caution. He descended, lantern in hand, and found himself in a vast subterranean hall. The air was cooler here, heavier with the scent of damp stone and old wood. The space stretched far beyond what the exterior of the manor would suggest. At its center was a long table, set for dozens, the polished silverware glinting faintly in the lantern's glow. Chairs lined each side, pulled out as though awaiting guests who had already arrived. Candles flickered in iron sconces along the walls, casting shadows that danced and swayed in ways that made Thomas's stomach tighten. He stepped closer. Plates gleamed under the candlelight, covered with silver domes that seemed to pulse with warmth. He lifted one carefully. Beneath it lay a roast, golden and steaming, the aroma rich and oddly familiar. Bread still warm, fruit perfectly arranged, wine poured into glasses as if just moments ago someone had been seated there. A faint hum reached his ears, almost like a whispered tune, and the shadows at the far end of the hall shifted. Figures appeared, seated in the chairs, dressed in finery that had long since gone out of fashion. Women in gowns with high collars and delicate lace, men in suits with brass buttons and cravats. Their faces were pale, faint as smoke, but the details were precise. Their movements were slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic, yet their presence was undeniable. Thomas swallowed hard. He wanted to call for help, to run back up the stairs, but something held him in place. The figures turned their heads in unison toward him, eyes pale yet aware, and in that gaze he felt the weight of centuries. One of the women raised a glass. The silver shimmered in the candlelight. "Welcome?" Her voice echoed softly, though her lips barely moved. "We've been expecting you." The air around him vibrated with the faintest echo of music. Not a single instrument was visible, yet the notes hung heavy, filling the hall with a melody that tugged at memory and imagination alike. The candles flared briefly, then dimmed, revealing more figures seated at the far reaches of the table. They were all there, the entire feast, each seat taken by someone lost to time. Thomas's lantern flickered, and when the light steadied, he realized the figures were not moving. They were repeating the same actions over and over, lifting forks, cutting meat, raising glasses, yet never finishing. It was a dance frozen in repetition, an endless cycle that had no beginning and no end. A whisper came from somewhere close to him, almost imperceptible. "Sit," it said. The voice was gentle, but carried authority, soft yet impossible to ignore. Thomas felt an irresistible pull toward the nearest chair. He tried to resist, but the air thickened, warm and enticing. The scent of the food grew stronger, and with each step, the weight of unseen eyes pressed down on him. When he reached the chair, he glanced around. Every figure at the table now seemed to shift slightly, as though acknowledging his presence. The woman at the head of the table lifted her glass again, her pale eyes meeting his. There was a strange kindness in her gaze, but also a warning, subtle and unspoken. "You may stay," she said softly, "or you may leave. But once you choose, the meal will not end until you are a part of it." Thomas's hands shook. He wanted to turn, to run, but the chair beneath him seemed to grow heavier with every heartbeat. The floorboards, though made of solid stone, seemed to ripple faintly as if the hall itself were alive, shifting to keep him there. The hum of music grew louder, entwining with the sound of cutlery and hushed conversation. A shadow passed across the wall, long and fluid, as if someone had walked between him and the flickering candlelight. The scent of wine became intoxicating. The warmth of the food impossible to resist. Every instinct told him to flee, yet the pull was magnetic, as though the very manor wanted him to become part of this ghostly feast. A figure appeared at the far end of the table, standing, its movements slow and deliberate. It held a decanter of red wine, pouring endlessly into glasses that filled themselves. The figures at the table lifted their heads in silent acknowledgement, raising their glasses toward Thomas. The lantern trembled in his hand. Shadows seemed to reach from the walls toward the table, brushing against the backs of chairs, caressing the empty spaces as if urging him to join. Thomas's mind screamed to resist, yet a strange calm began to settle over him. The repetition, the endless cycle of dining and toasting, seemed almost comforting in its certainty. The woman at the head of the table spoke again, her voice carrying clearly now, each word a measured note in the hall's haunting symphony. They returned to remember joy, the moments that defined them, the meals they cherished. All who dine here are remembered. All who stay are never forgotten. Sit and be part of the memory, or rise and leave the manor. The choice is yours. Oh, Thomas's heart pounded, a mixture of fear and fascination swirling inside him. He glanced at the nearest seat, the candlelight catching the empty place setting. The silverware gleamed, the wine glass waiting, the plate warm with food that had no owner. The hall seemed to breathe around him, the figures frozen yet alive in a cycle that had lasted decades, perhaps centuries. Outside, the night was quiet, but down here, in the depths beneath the manor, the echoes of laughter and clinking glass told of a celebration that could never truly end. And as Thomas stood there, the pull of the unseen forces, of the feast that stretched endlessly before him, became impossible to deny. He could almost feel the warmth of the chairs beside him, the soft weight of unseen hands guiding him toward a seat. The music swelled, wrapping around him like a shroud. The air shimmered with heat and memory. The shadows shifted again, and the woman at the head of the table lifted her glass one last time, waiting. Thomas's next step would decide whether he joined the endless feast or became just another observer of a memory that refused to die. Thomas hesitated, his gaze shifting from the empty chair to the figures at the table. Each one was frozen, mid-gesture, yet somehow aware of his presence. Their eyes, pale and distant, held a quiet insistence, a patient expectation that made his chest tighten. The scent of wine and roast filled the air, rich and intoxicating, drawing him closer despite the gnawing fear in his gut. He took a cautious step forward, then another. The lantern trembled in his hand, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. He could see the details now. The lace on the women's sleeves, the polished buttons on the men's coats, the delicate crystal glasses that seemed to hum faintly as if alive. The table itself seemed endless, stretching farther than the hall would allow, filled with faces from centuries past. A soft clinking reached his ears, cutlery against china, but the source was impossible to pinpoint. It seemed to come from every direction, surrounding him. A low murmur, like a conversation just beyond comprehension, rose and fell with the rhythm of the unseen music. Thomas felt his knees weaken, but something in him urged him forward, closer to the empty chair. "You belong here," the woman at the head of the table whispered, her voice like silk brushing against stone. "All who walk these halls eventually find their place. Do not resist the pull of what has been." He swallowed hard. His mind screamed at him to turn and flee, to abandon the manor and the hall and all of this impossible display. But his feet refused to obey, moving toward the chair as if guided by invisible strings. The air grew warmer, heavier. scented with the bread, roasted meats, and red wine that had been laid out centuries ago. Every sense he had was engulfed, drowning him in the reality of the feast and the echoes of its long-past joy. The figures began to shift imperceptibly, just enough for Thomas to notice. A man at the far end lifted a fork to his lips. A woman brushed her hand over a plate of fruit. The movements precise, yet eerily repetitive. The music swelled, rising and falling with a rhythm that seemed to match his heartbeat. As he reached the chair, he felt a strange weight settle over him, a warmth that was almost comforting. The lantern light flickered across the polished surface of the table, illuminating a place setting carved with intricate patterns, a wine glass filled as if by magic. He could almost imagine the person who had once sat there, now long gone, yet still present in spirit. The whispers around him grew louder, layering over one another in a soft chorus. "Welcome. Sit. Join us, remember?" They were not threatening. They were insistent, gentle, a call to partake in the memory of joy, in the ritual that had been frozen in time. Thomas's hand hovered over the back of the chair. Every instinct screamed at him to step back, to flee into the stone corridors of the manor. Yet a peculiar calm settled over him, as if the hall itself had wrapped him in an invisible embrace, promising that nothing here could harm him unless he allowed it. The woman at the head of the table lifted her glass once more, her expression serene yet unreadable. "They wait, Thomas. They wait for all who come." He glanced at the figures, seated along the table, the ones at the far end, fading slightly into shadow, yet still unmistakably present. Each place setting was immaculate, each glass filled, each plate carrying food that had somehow remained untouched for decades. The repetition of gestures, the endless toasts, the frozen smiles, it was hypnotic, a ritual that defied logic and time. Thomas's hand finally touched the chair, cool and solid, beneath his fingers. The moment he did, a shiver ran down his spine. The room seemed to exhale, the figures straightening, turning their heads in unison toward him. The music shifted slightly, a minor key weaving into the melody, and he felt the weight of centuries pressing gently against his mind. The woman's voice cut through the sound of distant laughter and clinking silver. "Stay, and you will remember. Leave, and the memory will fade, but the pull remains. Choose wisely." He sank slowly into the chair, the warmth of the seat enveloping him. The table stretched infinitely before him, the figures leaning just enough, the wine glasses tilting in silent acknowledgement. The air pulsed with life and memory, a feast that had lasted beyond death, beyond time, beyond any reckoning he had ever known. As he settled, the lantern light seemed to brighten, casting a golden glow over the faces, over the table, over the feast that had endured for centuries. The music swelled into a delicate harmony, a symphony of a night long past, yet forever present. The first bite of bread he took was warm, the wine sweet, and for a fleeting moment Thomas forgot the world above, the storm outside, and all the years that had passed since the manor had first welcomed its spectral guests. Thomas felt the warmth of the bread in his hand and the faint stick of wine on his tongue, and a strange calm began to wash over him. He could hear the soft scrape of silver against china, the gentle rustle of gowns, the faint clatter of chairs as the ghostly diners adjusted in their endless ritual. Yet the movements were precise, calculated, almost hypnotic, drawing him deeper into the hall's timeless embrace. The figures at the table were no longer distant shadows. Each one leaned forward just enough to acknowledge him, their eyes pale but full of awareness. A woman passed a platter of roasted meat toward him, the plate floating just slightly above the table, as if carried by unseen hands. He hesitated, then reached for it, the warmth seeping into his fingers, grounding him in a reality he could not explain. The music swelled, filling every corner of the hall. It was a waltz, slow and deliberate, echoing with voices he could not place. A faint chorus of humming drifted from the far end of the table, accompanying the melody. Thomas realized that the hall itself seemed alive with memory, a resonance of a night that had occurred centuries ago but was somehow eternal. Every note, every movement, every whisper of laughter was repeated perfectly, as though the room refused to let the memory fade. A shadow passed beside him, brushing lightly against his shoulder. It was a man in a dark coat, sitting just behind an empty chair. His face was sharp, pale, and his eyes seemed to pierce through Thomas, measuring him, weighing him against some invisible standard. Thomas's heartbeat quickened, but the presence was not threatening. Instead, it was patient, waiting. The woman at the head of the table lifted her glass again, and he felt compelled to do the same. The wine in his hand seemed heavier now, warmer, a liquid memory of countless toasts made on countless nights. The figures along the table mirrored his actions, raising their glasses with slow, deliberate precision. He drank, tasting the centuries in the richness of the red, the sweetness of the harvest that no longer existed in the world above. "They return to remember," whispered the woman at the head of the table. Her voice was soft but commanding, each word resonating in the walls of the hall. The moments that mattered most, the joys that defined them, the laughter shared before time claimed them. This is their memory, their feast, their eternity. Thomas glanced along the table. Every figure leaned slightly toward him now, not in menace, but in expectation. Their gestures, their frozen movements, carried a subtle invitation, a pull he could neither resist nor fully understand. The warmth of the chairs, the glow of the candlelight, the rich aroma of the feast, it all conspired to make him feel as though he belonged, as though he had always been a part of this spectral gathering. As he took another bite, he noticed something he hadn't before. The walls of the hall seemed to shimmer, faint ripples distorting the edges of the room. The figures at the table were reflected in the polished surfaces of the stone, faintly multiplied, giving the impression of endless diners stretching out into infinity. The music rose in harmony, the humming voices intertwining with the faint echo of clinking glasses. The feast was more than a memory. It was a living ritual, sustained by the attention and presence of anyone who dared to enter. A man in a finely tailored coat leaned forward, placing a hand lightly on the table. Thomas felt a subtle vibration beneath his fingers, as if the table itself were breathing. The scent of wine and roast deepened, the warmth of the plates spreading through him, grounding him in the impossible reality of the feast. "You are part of it now," the woman whispered. "Not merely a guest, but a witness, and perhaps more if you choose to stay. Do not fear what comes, for the table welcomes all who are patient and curious. Some come and leave, but some remain, bound by the memory, carried by the ritual, embraced by eternity." Thomas looked around, mesmerized. Every detail, the shimmer of the candles, the glow in the glass, the way shadows curved over the tablecloth, was perfect, precise, eternal. The music swirled around him, tugging at something deep within, and he felt a sense of belonging he had never known. The feast beneath the manor was not simply a memory of joy. It was a living echo, an unbroken chain of celebration and remembrance, drawing in anyone who dared to witness it. And as Thomas sat holding the warm plate of roasted meat, lifting the wine glass in imitation of centuries of diners before him, he realized he could no longer distinguish between the living and the dead, between past and present, between memory and reality. The hall had claimed him gently, subtly, enveloping him in its timeless embrace, and the feast continued as it always had, endless, unyielding, eternal. The hall seemed to pulse with life, though no living creature had built it, and no sound came from the world above. Thomas felt the weight of centuries pressing around him. Not heavy or cruel, but inevitable. Every glance at the figures along the table was a reminder that they had waited for this moment, for someone to join, for a witness to validate the memory that refused to die. The woman at the head of the table rose slowly, the candlelight reflecting off the folds of her gown. Her movements were deliberate, a dance in perfect rhythm with the music that seemed to flow from the very walls. She extended her hand toward Thomas, inviting, patient, serene. He felt the pull of her gesture, magnetic and undeniable, as if the hall itself were urging him to stand and move forward. A hush fell over the table, the figures leaning slightly, the faintest echo of anticipation vibrating in the air. Thomas rose, unsteady but compelled, stepping forward as though guided by invisible strings. The floor beneath him hummed softly, resonating with his heartbeat. Each step was measured, precise, in harmony with the endless rhythm of the feast. He reached the head of the table, and the woman's hand hovered just above his. Her gaze held him, unblinking, timeless. "You may touch," she said softly. "You may partake fully, or you may step back. But know this, once you engage, the memory will enfold you. The feast remembers all who sit, all who observe, all who listen. It never forgets." Thomas's hand trembled as he reached forward. When his fingers brushed hers, a warmth surged through him, spreading from his chest outward, enveloping him in a sensation both comforting and terrifying. The music shifted, swelling into a chorus of voices that seemed to originate from every corner of the hall at once. He could see now that the figures were not entirely spectral. They shimmered, solid in some place, intangible in others, like smoke shaped by memory and longing. The feast continued around him, each movement and gesture repeated endlessly, yet never stagnant. Plates floated briefly, silverware tapped in perfect cadence. Wine poured itself without pause. The figures raised glasses to one another, to absent guests, to time itself, and Thomas found himself raising his own glass, joining the chorus of centuries. A young girl at the far end of the table offered him a slice of bread, her hand hovering slightly above the plate, the bread warm and soft as if just baked. He took it, feeling the texture between his fingers, tasting it, and finding it imbued with a flavor he could not place, rich with history, with joy, with fleeting moments of happiness long since vanished. The hall shifted subtly, the shadows stretching and bending around him. Each candle flickered in unison, casting a golden glow that highlighted the details of the table. The gleaming silverware, the delicate crystal, the polished wood. The figures leaned toward him in silent acknowledgement, their motions graceful, patient, and eternal. Thomas realized that the feast was not merely a memory. It was a living archive, a ritual that preserved the essence of those who had dined before him. Their laughter, their gestures, the simple act of sharing a meal, all of it had been captured, sustained by the hall, and now it was part of it. The woman at the head of the table spoke again, her voice carrying clearly above the music and whispers. "All who enter this hall are remembered. Some remain as observers, others become part of the feast itself. The memory of joy cannot fade, not while anyone is willing to witness it, to honor it, to partake in it." Thomas felt a strange peace settle over him. Fear still lingered, but it was tempered by understanding. The hall was not a trap, not a prison. It was a sanctuary of remembrance, a place where the echoes of life and celebration endured long past their natural end. Every bite of food, every sip of wine, every gesture repeated at the table was a testament to lives lived, to moments cherished, to joy immortalized. He glanced along the table, seeing generations of figures, each caught in their perfect rhythm. The hall vibrated with their presence, and he understood that he was no longer merely an outsider. He was a participant, a witness, a new link in the chain of memory that the manor had sustained for centuries. The music swelled one final time, a crescendo of harmony and faint laughter, filling the hall with a beauty so profound it was almost unbearable. Thomas lifted his glass, the warmth in his hands echoing the warmth in his heart, and joined the endless toast of a feast that had no beginning and no end. And beneath the manor, in the vast hall of shadow and candlelight, the feast continued, eternal, unbroken, and now Thomas was part of it. The clinking of glasses, the soft murmur of conversation, the faint, comforting scent of roast and wine, they all embraced him as one of their own. The feast beneath the manor remembered him, and in return, he remembered it, fully, irrevocably, forever. On the outskirts of a small coastal town, where the waves of the sea whispered secrets to the wind, there stood a restaurant that appeared as ordinary as any other. Its windows were polished, the sign above the door painted in cheerful letters, promising the finest seafood and homely fare. Locals walked past without a second thought, and tourists stopped occasionally, charmed by the smell of fresh bread and roasting fish. Yet the restaurant had a reputation, known quietly among a few as a place where patrons sometimes vanished, or where the dining room seemed alive even when no one was present. Lydia, a young food critic from the city, had heard rumors of the place. She was drawn by curiosity and the promise of uncovering a hidden gem. One gray afternoon, she pushed open the door, greeted by a faint chime. The interior was immaculate, tables arranged perfectly, polished silverware laid out with precise care, napkins folded into perfect triangles. The smell of simmering broth and baking bread was rich and inviting, yet no one came to greet her. "Hello?" she called softly, her voice swallowed by the high ceilings. No reply came, only the gentle hum of the ventilation and the faint murmur of distant waves. She stepped further inside, heels clicking on the tile floor. The chairs were pushed neatly under the tables, the tablecloth spotless, and yet there was an unsettling sense of anticipation in the air. She felt as though the restaurant were watching her, waiting for her to make the first move. A flicker of movement caught her eye. At the far end of the dining room, a chair shifted slightly as if someone had just left it. Lydia froze, her pulse quickening. There was no one there, only the empty chair and the glint of sunlight catching the silverware laid out across the table. A soft sigh seemed to float across the room, almost like a whispered welcome, though her ears told her no one was present. Drawn by curiosity, she moved closer to the shifting chair. Each step made the restaurant feel more alive, as though the walls themselves were breathing. The smell of food intensified, carrying with it faint undertones of laughter, of conversation, of toasts long past. It was as if the restaurant were remembering every meal ever served within its walls, every diner who had sat, every moment shared over a plate of food. She reached the table, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface of polished wood. A plate sat there, steaming faintly, though no one had placed it. The aroma of roasted fish mingled with herbs and butter, almost overwhelming her senses. She glanced around the room, noting that every table bore the same evidence. Plates set as if waiting for diners, glasses filled, napkins neatly folded, but not a single soul in sight. Then she heard it. The faint scrape of a chair across the tile floor. It was delicate, tentative, as if someone were settling in for a meal. Lydia spun around, but the room remained empty. The sound had come from the far end of the dining room near the open kitchen. She hesitated, then approached, her heartbeat echoing in the stillness. The kitchen was immaculate, gleaming copper pots hanging in perfect rows. Steam rose from a pot of broth, though no cook stirred it. A knife rested beside a cutting board, as though recently used, and yet no hand had touched it. She could see the faint imprint of a hand in flour on the counter, yet the flour itself had not settled, defying time. A soft voice echoed from the dining room, low and melodic, almost singing. "Welcome. Sit. Join us." Lydia spun toward the source, but saw nothing. No one entered from the kitchen. No shadow passed across the walls. Yet the chair she had noticed earlier had pulled itself closer to the table. She approached slowly, her hands shaking. The plate of fish steamed more boldly now, a knife and fork beside it, perfectly positioned. She could smell the subtle tang of lemon, the sweetness of butter, the faint smoke from roasted herbs. As she hesitated, the sound of cutlery tapping on porcelain began. Soft at first, then rising in rhythm. The clinking was precise, deliberate, a pattern almost musical in its perfection. She glanced around the room. Every table began to echo the sound as though invisible diners had taken their seats and commenced their meals. Plates shifted, glasses tilted, napkins fluttered in the faintest breeze. Every detail was exact, perfect, yet entirely unexplainable. The voice returned, whispering again. "Eat, stay, remember." A chill ran down her spine, but beneath it was a strange pull, a compulsion she could not resist. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to step back into the world outside. Yet her curiosity anchored her in place. She felt the warmth of unseen hands guiding her toward a chair. The cutlery on the table rattled slightly, as if inviting her to join in the ritual. The steam rising from the plate swirled and curled toward her, as though coaxing her to taste what had been prepared for someone who had long since departed. The restaurant seemed to expand around her, the walls stretching subtly, the tables extending into shadowed corners she could not see clearly. Every surface shimmered faintly, reflecting candlelight that wasn't there, hinting at meals served in centuries past, laughter and conversation frozen in a delicate loop. The soft hum of voices rose, overlapping, layering in harmony with the clinking of silver and porcelain. Lydia's hand hovered over the edge of the plate. The aroma was irresistible, yet terrifying. She could sense the presence of diners, invisible, yet undeniably there. Each table seemed aware of her, as if the restaurant itself were alive, conscious, guiding her to her place. She took a shallow breath, feeling the pull of the unseen feast, the weight of countless memories pressing softly against her mind. The room pulsed with expectation, a heartbeat she could feel in her chest, in the soles of her shoes, in the tips of her fingers. She knew she had a choice, to flee and leave the restaurant as she found it, empty and silent, or to sit, to partake, to become part of the endless ritual of the invisible diners who never truly left. Lydia's hand trembled as it hovered over the plate. The warmth radiating from the food was tangible, almost alive, and the aroma seemed to seep into her very thoughts. The cutlery clinking across the room rose in a gentle cadence, surrounding her, coaxing her forward. She could feel the presence of unseen diners all around her, invisible yet profoundly aware of her hesitation. Every instinct urged her to flee, yet some deeper, unspoken curiosity anchored her to the spot. A faint movement at the far end of the dining room caught her eye. The shadows seemed to shift with purpose, elongating and curling toward her, as if the room itself were reaching out. The chairs at the empty tables began to inch slightly forward, the legs scraping softly against the tiled floor. Glasses tilted, as if filled by invisible hands, and plates moved as though guided by a delicate touch. She could sense the invisible energy of the room, an almost sentient force guiding her toward her seat. "You are expected," whispered a voice from somewhere behind the gleaming counters of the kitchen. It was soft, melodic, yet undeniable. The sound carried the authority of centuries, layered with faint echoes of laughter and conversation. Lydia's fingers brushed the edge of the plate, and warmth surged through her hand, spreading slowly up her arm. She gasped, startled by the sensation, and then felt an odd calm settle over her. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she slid into the chair. The moment she did, the room seemed to exhale, a faint ripple passing through the tables, chairs, and cutlery. The clinking of silverware grew louder, synchronized in a pattern that was almost musical. The aroma of food intensified, richer and more intoxicating, wrapping around her like a warm embrace. Each note of the unseen music and each echo of laughter felt intimately familiar, though she could not place why. The first bite of fish she took was extraordinary. Tender, seasoned perfectly, it melted on her tongue, carrying hints of herbs, butter, and citrus that seemed impossibly fresh. Yet the taste was infused with something else, a subtle richness that hinted at centuries of meals served, remembered, and cherished. Each chew drew her deeper into the hall's reality, blurring the boundary between the world outside and the memory embedded within the restaurant. The invisible diners were present now in a way that was unmistakable. She could feel their attention, gentle but insistent, brushing over her consciousness. Plates rose and fell, glasses tipped in rhythm, and soft murmurs, barely perceptible at first, became layered whispers surrounding her. She could almost discern fragments of conversations, toasts offered long ago, the soft cadence of voices in harmony with the clinking of silverware. A woman's voice rose slightly above the hum, delicate and precise. Remember, it said. Partake, witness, honor. Every meal is a memory, every taste a story, every guest a guardian of what is past. Lydia felt the words echo through her mind. The room seemed to respond, the air vibrating subtly with the resonance of countless shared dinners. The warmth of the chair beneath her grew comforting, the soft glow of non-existent candles shimmering faintly in her vision. She realized she was no longer alone, though no one was visible. She was surrounded by the essence of countless patrons, all preserved within the restaurant's walls, all participating in a ritual that refused to end. The clinking of cutlery rose to a soft crescendo, overlapping with the whispers and faint hum of music. Lydia took another bite, savoring the flavors, and felt a strange connection to the invisible diners. Each chew seemed to anchor her deeper into the memory, as if the act of eating itself tethered her to the hall's eternal ritual. The warmth of the bread, the richness of the wine, the delicate balance of flavors, all became part of a rhythm she could not resist. She glanced at the surrounding tables, sensing the invisible presence seated at each one. Each chair, each plate, each glass was aligned perfectly, waiting for participation. The room seemed to breathe in synchrony with her own movements, the rhythm of centuries echoing softly in her mind. Lydia understood now that the restaurant was more than a space. It was a living archive, a sanctuary for memories, a place where meals never truly ended. The unseen patrons leaned forward subtly, acknowledging her presence with gestures she could feel more than see. The whispers grew slightly louder, layering over one another like a gentle chorus. Welcome. Join us. Remember. The words wrapped around her, steady and insistent, yet comforting in their persistence. And as Lydia lifted her fork once more, tasting the warmth of the invisible feast, she realized she had stepped into a world that existed entirely apart from time, a space where the empty restaurant served not merely food, but remembrance, presence, and a quiet, enduring company that refused to vanish. The more Lydia ate, the more the restaurant seemed to pulse with life, though no living soul could be seen. The warmth of the food, the subtle weight of the cutlery in her hands, and the faint vibration of the floor beneath her chair, it all blended into a sensation that was both comforting and disorienting. She could sense the invisible diners leaning slightly, adjusting their positions, acknowledging her presence without words. The clinking of silverware across the room grew rhythmic, almost musical. Each tap and scrape seemed to respond to her movements, as though the entire hall had synchronized with her participation. Lydia took a slow sip of wine from the crystal glass that had appeared in front of her. It was full-bodied, rich, tasting of years and memories she could not place. The flavor seemed to carry the echoes of laughter, of conversation, of dinners long past, preserved and served anew for anyone who dared to join. From somewhere beyond her vision, a faint shadow moved across the polished tile floor. It was subtle, like the brushing of a gown, yet undeniable. The invisible presence was patient, drawing her attention without fear, urging her to take part in the ritual unfolding around her. She felt the pull of centuries embedded in the restaurant, the weight of memories pressing softly, insistently, against her mind. The soft hum of voices returned, layered and intricate, mingling with the clinking silver and the faint echo of music that seemed to rise and fall like waves. She could catch fragments of words, phrases she could not fully comprehend, yet they resonated with something deep within her consciousness. Words of welcome, of invitation, of remembrance. The very air seemed to vibrate with the weight of these echoes, pressing gently against her ears and her skin. A chair scraped lightly beside her, shifting closer to the table. She felt the subtle presence of someone or something taking a seat. The invisible diner's hand hovered over the edge of a plate, then moved to lift a piece of bread, mirroring her own gestures. The effect was mesmerizing, a silent dance of reflection and anticipation. Lydia felt herself pulled deeper into the rhythm, every movement aligning with the unseen pattern, the eternal choreography of the restaurant. She noticed, too, that the faint reflections on the polished table surfaces were no longer mere distortions. In the shimmering surfaces, she could see vague shapes, almost human, seated at the tables around her. They were not fully there, not fully solid, but the sense of their presence was undeniable. Their faces, though obscured, seemed intent on her participation, patient and encouraging, inviting her to join in their timeless ritual. "You are part of it now," whispered a voice, soft but commanding, emanating from nowhere and everywhere at once. Every diner, every seat, every meal remembered, now includes you. Sit fully, eat fully, and the memory endures. Resist, and the hall fades, but the pull remains. Lydia's hands shook as she reached for another piece of food. The warmth of the plate, the scent, the richness of the flavors, all combined to create a sensation that was almost hypnotic. The invisible diners around her seemed to lean closer, subtly, their gestures synchronous with her own. She could feel their attention, patient and insistent, a quiet insistence that made her aware of the hall's purpose. The music swelled, rising in layers of soft melody, each note mingling with the faint chorus of clinking cutlery and whispers. She realized that the restaurant itself was alive with memory, preserving the joy of meals long past. Each bite she took, each sip from the wine glass, each movement of her hand became part of a ritual that had endured for decades, perhaps centuries. A shadow passed across the room, faintly brushing the edge of a chair, then another. The invisible diners mirrored her gestures with uncanny precision, raising their glasses, cutting their meals, leaning forward just enough to acknowledge her presence. Lydia could feel the rhythm in her own chest, a heartbeat synchronized with the pulsing energy of the hall. The air thickened with warmth and aroma, carrying faint whispers of voices, fragments of toasts, laughter, soft conversations that had long since vanished from the world above. She felt herself becoming part of the memory, not merely an observer, but a participant in the eternal feast. Every sense was engaged, every instinct drawn to the rhythm, every thought entangled in the hall's persistent, patient embrace. And as Lydia took another bite, savoring the delicate balance of flavors, she understood the truth of the empty restaurant. It served no one in the conventional sense. Yet it nourished those who entered in a deeper way, sustaining their connection to moments and people that had long since passed, creating a space where memory, presence, and participation intertwined in a feast that refused to end. Lydia felt the invisible diners leaning closer, their presence now almost tangible, a warmth brushing her consciousness. Each movement she made, raising her glass, cutting a piece of fish, savoring the aroma of the wine, seemed to echo perfectly in the hall. The unseen diners responded subtly. A tilt of a glass here, a shift of a chair there, a whisper of approval that floated around her like a gentle breeze. The clinking of cutlery intensified, but it was no longer unsettling. It became part of the rhythm, a music layered over centuries of memory. Lydia could feel the resonance in the floor beneath her, the vibration connecting her directly to the space around her. The table before her seemed almost to pulse with energy, each plate, glass, and piece of silverware alive with purpose, waiting for participation. A soft warmth enveloped her hands as she reached for another bite, the plate steady, comforting, as though reassuring her presence was welcome. She could sense the movement of invisible hands guiding the food gently toward her, coaxing her into the ritual of the meal. Each taste brought a deeper connection, flavors imbued with history, with laughter, with moments that had long since vanished from the world outside. The voices, whispers that had been faint and distant, became clearer. Words she could not fully understand yet seemed familiar floated around her. Invitations, memories, remnants of conversations past intertwined with the hum of the room. Each whisper carried the weight of countless dinners shared in joy, in grief, in celebration and remembrance. The shadows moved again, subtle and fluid, brushing the edge of the chair beside her. Lydia's pulse quickened, yet she felt no fear. Instead, there was a comforting inevitability to the movements, a gentle insistence that guided her participation. She was no longer an outsider. The hall, the tables, the invisible diners, they all acknowledged her presence, patiently, insistently. "You are remembered," the voice whispered softly, echoing through the dining room. "Each bite, each sip, each gesture binds you to the feast. Partake fully, witness, honor. The memory continues, now with you." Lydia's heart beat in sync with the rhythm of the unseen diners. She lifted her fork once more, cutting a piece of fish and tasting the richness of herbs and butter. She felt the pulse of centuries beneath her fingertips, the gentle weight of invisible eyes observing her, approving, welcoming. The hall's presence was undeniable, a living archive of meals, laughter, and memories that refused to fade. The music swelled, layering with the chorus of clinking cutlery and hushed whispers. Every movement she made was mirrored subtly, perfectly, by invisible hands. Each sip of wine, each bite of bread connected her more deeply to the unseen ritual. The empty restaurant, she realized, was alive in a way she had never imagined. Not with people, but with memory, with presence, with an enduring celebration that refused to end. Lydia glanced around the room, sensing the invisible diner's subtle acknowledgement. The polished tables reflected faint images of guests long gone, their gestures frozen yet purposeful. She understood now that the restaurant's purpose was not to serve food, but to preserve memory, to sustain the joy of meals shared and the warmth of company and the echoes of countless conversations. With each bite, each sip, each movement, she became part of the living memory of the place. The unseen diners leaned forward subtly, their gestures encouraging, patient, serene. The whispers intertwined with the music, forming a lullaby of presence and remembrance that wrapped around her like a soft cloak. And as Lydia continued to eat, the invisible feast stretched infinitely, each table, each chair, each ghostly diner a testament to the enduring nature of shared moments. The empty restaurant served no one in the ordinary sense, yet it nourished those willing to participate in its ritual, binding them to a timeless celebration that neither began nor ended, sustained eternally by the memory of joy and the presence of those who dared to witness it. On the rugged coast where the sea met jagged cliffs, there was a tavern known to the few who dared sail these waters as a place both welcoming and uncanny. It was perched precariously above the waves, the timbers creaking as the wind whipped through the cracks. Local fishermen and seasoned sailors spoke in hushed tones about the tavern's long history and of the supper that appeared on stormy nights when no crew was aboard any ship near the shore. Henry, a young sailor eager for adventure, had heard the tales while stopping at a nearby port. Tales of men lured by the scent of roasting meat and fresh bread. Stories of laughter and clinking mugs heard from the shoreline when the tavern itself seemed deserted. The old sailor's warnings were vivid, yet irresistible. One gray evening, as the wind howled and the waves crashed with unusual force, Henry decided to see for himself. He approached the tavern carefully, stepping over wet stones and slick sand. The sign above the door creaked in the wind, swinging as if moved by invisible hands. Pushing it open, he was immediately enveloped in warmth. The scent of cooked meat, fresh herbs, and smoky fire filled the air. Yet the tavern was empty. Chairs were tucked neatly under tables, mugs polished and lined up, the hearth crackling with a fire that seemed far too lively for a place without a keeper. "Hello?" Henry called, his voice tentative. The wind outside rattled the windows, and the creaking timbers responded, but no answer came. Yet he could hear it. A faint clatter of plates, a murmur of voices, the soft scraping of knives against wood, coming from the long table along the center of the tavern. He froze, heart pounding, the hair on his arms standing on end. The table was set perfectly. Wooden platters heaped with roasted fish, freshly baked bread, and steaming vegetables appeared to have been laid with care. Tankards filled with ale frosted at the edges, their contents untouched, yet emitting a heady aroma that made his stomach tighten. It was as if the tavern had been prepared for a grand gathering, and yet not a soul sat in attendance. He stepped closer, drawn by a curiosity that mingled uneasily with fear. A chair at the end of the table shifted slightly, rocking as if someone had just left it. The faint sound of laughter reached his ears, low and melodic, echoing softly through the timbered walls. Henry turned to see who had spoken, but the room remained empty. The firelight cast shadows that seemed almost human in their shapes, flickering along the walls and ceiling with subtle gestures of life. The table seemed to stretch farther than the room should allow, laden with platters of food that defied reason. Each dish appeared freshly prepared, steam rising in delicate tendrils that danced in the lantern light. Henry could hear the faint murmur of voices in conversation, yet when he strained his ears, he could discern no words, only the tone of camaraderie and shared joy. It was as if a crew, long vanished, had returned for one final supper. He felt a subtle pull toward the table, each step accompanied by the clatter of invisible cutlery. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and brine, the aroma mingling with the tang of the sea that slipped in through the cracks in the tavern walls. Henry's curiosity overpowered his fear, and he reached for the nearest chair, his hands brushing the polished wood. The chair was solid, warm beneath his fingers, yet somehow unclaimed. A faint, ghostly figure appeared at the far end of the table, dressed in the weathered garb of sailors long past. His eyes were bright, almost luminous, and he raised a tankard as if inviting Henry to join. The sound of invisible footsteps approached, soft and deliberate, and the table seemed to tremble slightly, resonating with the presence of those who had gathered once more. Henry's heart raced as he took a tentative step forward, the air around him pulsing with the energy of unseen companions. Every sense was alert, The smell of food, the warmth of the fire, the faint touch of a breeze brushing against his skin, all combined to create a reality that was impossible, yet undeniable. The sailor's supper had begun, and he was the only living participant invited to witness it. As he reached the table, the plates before him seemed to adjust subtly, tilting as if to offer their contents. The tankard in front of him filled to the brim with frothy ale, though no hand had poured it. The music of invisible fiddles began softly, a melody both haunting and familiar, accompanying the gentle clatter of cutlery and the low hum of voices. Henry realized that this was no ordinary meal. This was a feast of memory, preserved by the tavern and those who had once lived and died upon the turbulent waters. He took a deep breath and lifted the tankard. The warmth of the ale seeped into his fingers, the aroma intoxicating and grounding him in the moment. He could feel the presence of the ghostly sailors leaning subtly toward him, their gestures precise, expectant, patient. Every movement, every sound, every scent seemed orchestrated, a ritual that had endured for decades, perhaps centuries, waiting for someone to partake and honor it. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows and the wooden sign, yet inside the tavern time seemed suspended. The supper unfolded around him in perfect rhythm, the invisible diners silent yet palpably present. Each bite Henry took, each sip, each careful movement with his hands was mirrored subtly by the unseen crew, drawing him deeper into the ritual. The laughter, faint and melodic, wove around him like a gentle cloak. The soft scrape of knives and forks, the clink of tankards, the low hum of conversation. It all harmonized into a symphony of remembrance. Henry understood that he had entered a space where the line between past and present, living and dead, was no longer fixed. He was not merely witnessing the sailor's supper. He was participating, becoming part of a memory that refused to fade. Henry's hands trembled slightly as he reached for a piece of roasted fish. The aroma was intoxicating, carrying the faint hint of salt from the nearby sea and the subtle smokiness of the hearth fire. As he brought the food to his lips, he felt the energy of the tavern deep and around him, a gentle vibration that resonated in the floorboards, the walls, and even in his chest. It was as if the entire tavern was alive, breathing with the presence of those who had once dined here and now acknowledging him as part of their endless supper. The ghostly sailors were patient and precise in their invisible movements. Henry could feel the weight of their presence, subtle but undeniable. Chairs shifted slightly as if they were accommodating him. Cutlery tapped in perfect rhythm, and mugs raised gently as though inviting him to join in a toast. He lifted his tankard, the frothy ale warm against his fingers, and took a careful sip, feeling the taste resonate with memories he had never lived but somehow understood. Soft murmurs floated around him, fragments of conversations long past. He could hear the echoes of laughter from sailors sharing tales of storms survived, ports visited, and journeys undertaken. The words were indistinct, yet the emotions behind them, camaraderie, relief, and joy, were vivid. Henry felt a deep connection to these invisible diners, as if the tavern itself were allowing him to experience a moment frozen in time, preserved and shared across centuries. A gentle breeze swept through the tavern, carrying with it the salty tang of the sea. It rustled the edges of napkins and whispered along the polished wooden surfaces, yet no door or window had been opened. Henry realized the wind was part of the tavern's presence, a living memory of the countless nights sailors had gathered here after long voyages. The air seemed infused with stories, each breath he took, connecting him further to the invisible feast and its timeless participants. The table before him continued to adjust subtly, plates and mugs shifting with an almost imperceptible grace, as if ensuring that every detail was perfect. The food remained impossibly fresh, the warmth steady, and the aromas rich and inviting. Henry could feel the pull of the ritual, a gentle insistence that he participate fully, not merely as an observer, but as a living link in a chain of memory and remembrance. The music of invisible fiddles rose slightly, accompanied by the faint hum of voices. Henry noticed the way the shadows along the walls moved in harmony with the rhythm, flickering and twisting as if dancing. Each movement felt intentional, deliberate, a silent choreography performed for someone who understood the importance of being present. He realized that the supper was more than a meal. It was a living tribute to those who had gathered here, a celebration preserved beyond death, sustained by the tavern's uncanny energy. A figure appeared momentarily near the far end of the table, faint but distinctly human in form. The sailor lifted his mug, a ghostly smile on his lips, inviting Henry to mirror the gesture. Henry obeyed, raising his tankard in a silent toast. The warmth of the ale spread through him, mingling with the strange, comforting awareness of invisible hands adjusting the table, ensuring that every detail was as it should be. The presence of the unseen diners was subtle, yet powerful, a reminder that he was now part of their ritual, honored by their acknowledgement. The whispers grew slightly louder, layering over the music and clinking of cutlery. Henry could sense the tone of the words, the emotions behind them. Welcome, encouragement, remembrance, and celebration. He realized that each bite he took, each sip of ale, and each careful movement of his hands became part of the tavern's memory, linking him to the countless sailors who had dined here before. The room pulsed with an energy that was both comforting and disorienting, a rhythm that he could feel in his very bones. Henry glanced around, imagining the invisible diners seated at each table, leaning slightly forward, attentive yet patient. Their presence was more than a haunting. It was an invitation, a gentle insistence that the supper continue, that the memory endure. The tavern had not called him here to frighten or trap him, but to share something profound, a fleeting taste of eternity preserved in food, warmth, and companionship. He picked up his fork again, savoring the tender fish and the accompanying vegetables. The flavors were extraordinary, infused with an almost imperceptible essence of the sea, fire, and herbs. Every bite drew him deeper into the rhythm of the invisible feast. The soft cadence of cutlery, the faint hum of voices, the ghostly laughter threading through the air. Henry realized that he was no longer a mere observer. He had become a participant, part of the living memory of the sailor's supper, a link in the endless chain of remembrance that the tavern sustained. The tavern seemed to expand around Henry, each table, each chair, each flickering shadow subtly shifting to accommodate him, as if the space itself were aware of his presence. The clinking of invisible cutlery became a gentle symphony, weaving seamlessly with the faint, haunting melody of ghostly fiddles. Every sound resonated in perfect harmony with the rhythm of his heartbeat, grounding him even as the reality of the supper stretched the limits of his understanding. He noticed details that were impossible yet vivid. A mug tilting slightly toward him as if to offer a drink, a plate of bread rolling subtly closer. The faint scent of roasted meat intensifying in perfect timing with each bite he took. The invisible diners adjusted minutely, their presence patient, careful, deliberate. Henry could feel their awareness brushing against his consciousness, an almost tactile sense of their approval and welcome. The shadows along the walls flickered with life. They stretched and danced in patterns that mirrored the movements of invisible hands, the gestures of unseen diners. Henry realized that the tavern was not merely hosting a supper. It was orchestrating a living memory, preserving the joy, camaraderie, and ritual of a feast long past. Each element, the warmth, the taste, the sound, the smell, was carefully maintained, a living testament to the countless sailors who had once gathered here. A faint voice, low and melodic, rose above the hum of the room. Remember, partake, honor. All who dine here, all who witness, become part of the feast. Henry's gaze swept across the empty chairs and tables, sensing the invisible presence of sailors who leaned subtly toward him, offering silent companionship. The words carried a weight that was both comforting and profound, urging him to fully engage in the ritual unfolding around him. He lifted his tankard once more, the frothy ale warm and grounding in his hands. The invisible diner at the far end of the table mirrored the gesture, their tankard rising in perfect synchrony with his. The warmth of the drink spread through him, mingling with the subtle energy that vibrated throughout the tavern. Henry felt connected to a lineage of sailors long gone, part of a celebration that transcended time and mortality. The music swelled slightly, harmonizing with the rhythm of invisible utensils and the faint murmurs of voices. Each note seemed imbued with memory, carrying whispers of laughter, shared stories, and the quiet satisfaction of meals completed. Henry took a careful bite of roasted vegetables, noting the delicate balance of flavors. The taste seemed impossibly fresh, layered with an essence he could not place, yet somehow recognized, the essence of countless hands that had prepared the meal, countless voices that had celebrated its consumption. A shadow passed near him, brushing the edge of his chair, subtle and deliberate. Henry felt the gentle pressure of invisible hands, as if guiding him to partake fully, ensuring that each action he took contributed to the ritual. He realized that the supper was not merely for observation. It was participatory. His presence, his engagement, was required to complete the living memory of the tavern, to honor the sailors who had dined here before him. The whispers grew richer, layering over one another in an almost musical cadence. Fragments of conversation floated through the air, mingling with the hum of the fire and the faint scent of the sea. He could hear laughter rising in harmony with the clinking of silverware, each sound a thread in the tapestry of the tavern's enduring memory. Every movement, every bite, every sip he took wove him deeper into this ethereal rhythm, binding him to a feast that existed beyond the boundaries of time. Oh, Henry took a deep breath, feeling the weight of centuries pressing softly around him. The invisible sailors leaned forward slightly, their presence palpable in the gentle warmth that spread across his skin. He understood that this was no ordinary haunting. It was a living commemoration, a celebration preserved through ritual, memory, and the senses. The tavern existed to honor the joy of meals shared, to maintain the continuity of camaraderie, and to welcome those willing to partake in its enduring supper. He reached for another piece of fish, savoring the texture and flavor, letting the rhythm of the invisible feast guide him. The tankard beside him tilted ever so slightly, and he raised it instinctively, offering a silent toast to companions he could not see. The warmth of the ale, the taste of the food, the faint brush of invisible presence against him, all of it merged into an overwhelming sense of connection. Henry was no longer a mere witness. He was an integral part of the sailors' supper, a living participant in a celebration that had endured long after its mortal participants had passed. The fire crackled softly, the shadows danced with an almost sentient awareness, and the tavern pulsed with the energy of memory, ritual, and presence. Henry continued to eat and drink, every movement mirrored by invisible diners, every taste a link in the chain of remembrance. The sailors' supper was eternal, a feast sustained by the devotion of the tavern and the willingness of those who entered to honor its memory. And in that moment, Henry understood fully that he had become part of something far greater than himself, a living thread in the fabric of the unseen feast. Henry's senses were fully immersed in the rhythm of the tavern, the clinking of cutlery, the soft hum of ghostly voices, and the faint melody of unseen fiddles intertwined to form a symphony that was impossible to resist. Every breath he took carried the rich aroma of roasted meats, fresh bread, and sea salt air, anchoring him in a reality that defied logic, yet felt undeniably real. The warmth of the hearth and the subtle vibration of the floor beneath him created a sense of grounding, even as the supernatural presence of the invisible diners enveloped him completely. He noticed now the subtle gestures of the unseen sailors. A plate at the far end of the table tilted slightly, moving as if to offer him a bite. A tankard lifted slowly, the foam trembling at its edge, inviting him to toast silently. Shadows shifted across the walls, not chaotically, but deliberately, tracing shapes that mirrored the motion of invisible hands. Henry felt their attention keenly, a gentle insistence that he participate fully, that he acknowledged the presence of those who had returned from the past to share the supper. The whispers had grown into a chorus, layered with overlapping fragments of conversation, laughter, and soft encouragement. Henry could catch fleeting phrases, words of camaraderie, stories of storms survived, ports visited, loved ones remembered. The voices were not threatening, but intimate, drawing him further into the rhythm of the feast, insisting he become part of the living memory that the tavern maintained. He took another bite of food, letting the flavors wash over him, rich and impossibly vivid. Each taste seemed to carry the essence of the cooks long gone, of sailors who had prepared and consumed these meals across generations. The invisible diners mirrored his gestures subtly, raising their tankards and tilting plates, creating a sense of shared ritual that was at once comforting and profoundly eerie. A gust of wind swept through the tavern, rustling the edges of napkins and carrying the scent of the sea more strongly. Henry felt the invisible presence of the sailors brush against him, guiding him toward the heart of the table. Every movement was synchronized, every gesture mirrored, as though the unseen diners were orchestrating a choreography perfected over countless nights of storm and supper. He realized with awe that he was not merely witnessing the supernatural gathering, he was participating in it, becoming a living part of the ritual. The music rose in complexity, the fiddles weaving melodies that blended seamlessly with the clinking of silverware and the chorus of whispers. Henry could feel the rhythm in his own chest, each heartbeat aligning with the pulse of the invisible feast. The air seemed to vibrate softly, carrying with it the weight of memory and presence, the persistence of joy and celebration preserved beyond death. He took a careful sip of ale, feeling warmth spread through him as if connecting him directly to the unseen diners around him. Shadows flickered across the tables, elongating and retreating with the subtle motion of ghostly hands setting plates, pouring drinks, and adjusting cutlery. Henry sensed their patient attention, their encouragement to fully embrace the experience, to honor the supper with every movement, every bite, and every sip. The tavern was not merely a space, but a living archive, a preservation of shared joy, and Henry understood that he was now part of its ongoing story. The chorus of whispers intensified slightly, layering over the music and cutlery with a cadence that seemed to carry meaning beyond mere sound. Words of welcome, of remembrance, and of gratitude resonated around him. He could feel the presence of countless sailors leaning subtly forward, offering silent acknowledgement and companionship. The rhythm of the supper, the clinking, the whispers, the faint music, was no longer external. It had become a pulse within him, guiding his movements and tying him to the living memory of those who had dined here before. Henry lifted his fork once more, savoring the textures and flavors of the meal, and felt a profound sense of connection. The invisible diners mirrored his actions with precision, reinforcing the idea that the supper was not complete without him. Every gesture, every taste, every moment of participation wove him further into the tapestry of the feast, ensuring that the memory of the sailor's supper endured, now with him as part of its living essence. The tavern pulsed with warmth and energy, shadows dancing and flickering as if alive, music and whispers blending seamlessly with the rhythm of dining. Henry felt the centuries of meals and memories wrap around him like a cloak, a tangible presence that honored the past while incorporating the present. He understood fully that the sailor's supper existed beyond time, a celebration sustained by ritual, memory, and the willingness of the living to engage. As Henry continued to partake in the feast, every bite, every sip, every movement became a thread in the living memory of the tavern. The invisible diners leaned forward subtly, patient and approving, ensuring that the ritual was complete. The fire crackled, shadows danced, and the whispers carried tales of camaraderie. Storms survived, ports visited, and lives remembered. The sailor's supper was eternal, a feast that transcended life and death, inviting all who entered to participate in its timeless celebration. Henry understood in that quiet, haunting moment that he was no longer merely a visitor. He had become part of something far greater than himself, a living link in the chain of memory and ritual preserved by the tavern. The feast would continue, invisible yet palpable, sustained by the devotion of those who had come before and those willing to honor it. And in this suspended space of time, the sailor's supper endured, a testament to memory, presence, and the quiet communion of souls across the centuries. The world of ghostly encounters often leaves more questions than answers, and the phenomenon of phantom feasts is no exception. Scholars, paranormal investigators, and those who have witnessed these events have long debated the origins and purpose of ghostly dinners. Some argue that these apparitions are echoes of human desire, memories imprinted upon a location so strongly that they manifest for those sensitive enough to perceive them. Others suggest that these feasts are a bridge, a temporary communion between the living and the departed, a reminder that the bonds forged through shared meals do not end with death. One popular theory suggests that phantom feasts are memories trapped within the very walls where countless dinners once took place. Mansions, inns, and dining halls often hold centuries of human interaction within their timbers and stones. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, and even the scent of meals prepared with care may leave an imprint so powerful that it occasionally resurfaces. People who enter these spaces may experience not just fleeting apparitions, but entire gatherings reconstructed from the past, a vivid recreation that engages all senses. Psychologists who study the paranormal point out that human perception is particularly sensitive to context and expectation. A visitor entering a grand, abandoned dining hall may feel a sense of presence amplified by memory, suggestion, and the mind's tendency to fill in gaps. If the observer is aware of the building's history of grand parties, long-forgotten banquets, or mysterious disappearances, the brain may unconsciously project elements of those past events into the present. The resulting experience can feel tangible, as though unseen diners occupy the space, even if they are the product of memory and imagination. Yet there are countless reports from multiple witnesses, independent of prior knowledge, describing similar details: the warmth of a meal prepared, the precise arrangement of plates, the faint smell of roast or baking bread, and the subtle movements of invisible cutlery. Such consistency suggests that phantom feasts are more than mere hallucinations. Some paranormal researchers theorize that these events are residual energy, a phenomenon where moments of strong emotion and ritualistic activity imprint themselves on the environment. Feasts, by their very nature, involve high levels of social energy, laughter, conversation, shared joy, and sometimes grief, which could leave a lasting impression detectable centuries later. A fascinating perspective comes from anthropologists who study ghost traditions around the world. In many cultures, the concept of offering meals to the deceased is common, a ritual intended to honor ancestors and maintain a connection between the living and the dead. In these cases, the act of dining becomes a spiritual conduit, a bridge between planes. Phantom feasts may be the unintended reflection of such practices, a lingering presence created not by the dead attempting to communicate directly, but by the ceremonial significance of shared meals echoing through time. These banquets, therefore, could be seen as a natural extension of human attempts to bind memory, gratitude, and remembrance to food. The theory of interactive residual energy also provides a compelling explanation. Unlike simple hauntings where a single event is replayed endlessly, phantom feasts often respond to the living participants. Witnesses report that the arrangement of food may subtly adjust to their actions, invisible utensils may tilt to offer a bite, or glasses may lift slightly as if inviting them to toast. This interactivity suggests that the energy behind the feasts is not completely inert. It reacts, perhaps imitating the social cues ingrained in its origin, creating an experience that feels remarkably alive. The ghostly diners do not speak directly, but their presence is undeniably felt through these delicate interactions. Historical records sometimes offer hints of why a particular location becomes a stage for phantom feasts. Many such occurrences are linked to places where a sudden tragedy interrupted communal meals, such as a family struck by illness, travelers caught in an accident at an inn, or a ship's crew lost at sea before they could finish their supper. Some theorists argue that these uncompleted rituals leave a kind of energy vacuum, a hunger for closure that manifests as an ethereal banquet. Those who encounter the phantom meal are, in a sense, participating in the ritual that was never completed, a temporary fulfillment of an interrupted life. Physicists exploring parapsychology have proposed alternative explanations that rely on dimensions or energy fields beyond the ordinary. They suggest that phantom feasts might occur in spaces where thin veils between realities exist, allowing glimpses of past gatherings or parallel echoes of events. This could explain why the same locations sometimes exhibit repeated manifestations over centuries. In these moments, the living perceive a temporary intersection of timelines, where sensory input aligns with residual patterns of joy, celebration, and ritual. It is not simply memory. It is memory layered upon the present, tangible and immersive, inviting those who encounter it to participate. Researchers also point to the role of emotional resonance. Meals are rarely mundane. They are rituals that bind people together, celebrated in joy, remembrance, or mourning. The intensity of these emotions may amplify the likelihood of a location hosting a phantom feast. In some cases, the experience is comforting, a fleeting sense of connection to those who have come before. In others, it is haunting, a reminder of absence, loss, or unfulfilled traditions. The phantom feast becomes both mirror and messenger, reflecting human longing across generations, a testament to the power of shared sustenance and the rituals that accompany it. Witnesses often describe a paradoxical sense of presence and absence simultaneously. The tables may be set, the food inviting, the laughter faint but undeniable, yet no living being occupies the room. This paradox lies at the heart of what makes phantom feasts so compelling and unsettling. Scholars suggest that this tension is precisely what allows the human mind to perceive them as interactive. The gap between expectation and reality is bridged by the intensity of memory and ritual, creating an experience that feels real in every sense. Another compelling theory comes from folklore, where ghostly banquets are sometimes linked to moral or cautionary tales. In some stories, these feasts appear to warn of greed, excess, or unheeded hospitality. Travelers or diners who enter these haunted spaces may feel compelled to partake respectfully or risk the wrath of unseen hosts. The spectral banquet then serves a dual purpose, preserving memory while teaching lessons, embedding cultural values within the ghostly ritual. The phenomenon continues to intrigue both scientists and storytellers. It challenges the boundaries of perception, blurring the line between the physical and the supernatural, memory and present experience. Phantom feasts remind us that meals are more than sustenance. They are social anchors, emotional conduits, and markers of time. When such a ritual is disrupted, uncompleted, or deeply cherished, it may leave an imprint so potent that it resonates across generations, appearing to the living as a banquet that is both real and impossibly intangible. Theories surrounding phantom feasts often intersect with reports of ghostly etiquette and subtle interaction. Witnesses frequently describe tables that adjust slightly as if accommodating their presence, chairs tilting toward them, or utensils moving just enough to offer a portion of food. Some researchers interpret this as evidence that the energy behind the manifestation is not purely residual, but retains aspects of intentionality. It is as if the spirits or the echoes of memory are aware of the observer, inviting them to participate in a ritual that transcends death. This interactivity makes phantom feasts distinctly different from simple hauntings, where the experience is static and unresponsive. Anthropologists and folklorists suggest that these interactive elements may be remnants of social conduct embedded within the memory of the meal. A banquet is rarely just food. It is ceremony, complete with gestures, toasts, and the nuances of polite conversation. The careful arrangement of plates, the subtle motion of utensils, and the simulated clinking of tankards may reflect centuries of learned behavior frozen in the environment. When sensitive individuals enter these spaces, their presence may trigger these echoes, allowing the ritual to play out as if it were still alive. Some scholars propose that phantom feasts are connected to unresolved emotional energy. Meals often occur during moments of celebration, reconciliation, or mourning. When such moments are abruptly interrupted by disaster, death, or disappearance, they may leave behind an emotional residue so potent that it manifests as a tangible experience for future observers. In this sense, the banquet serves as a bridge between the living and the departed, a symbolic completion of a ritual left unfinished. The observer effectively participates in an act that restores closure, however momentarily. A particularly compelling theory involves collective memory. Locations that have hosted centuries of meals, manors, inns, dining halls, and ship's galleys may accumulate an invisible tapestry of experiences. The repeated emotional intensity of meals combined with laughter, storytelling, and social bonding could imprint on the physical environment in a way that transcends ordinary perception. Those who encounter the phantom feast may be tapping into this collective resonance, experiencing a layered memory shaped by countless participants across time. The ghostly banquet thus becomes an echo of shared humanity, as vivid as it is ephemeral. Psychologists exploring paranormal phenomena note the role of expectation and suggestion. A visitor aware of a location's haunted reputation is primed to perceive subtle cues, creaking floorboards, shifting shadows, faint smells that might otherwise go unnoticed. The mind may synthesize these sensory fragments into a coherent experience, interpreting the environment through the lens of cultural memory and personal anticipation. Yet many accounts defy simple psychological explanation. Multiple independent witnesses often report the same details: the precise arrangement of cutlery, the aroma of freshly baked bread, the gentle laughter of invisible diners. Such consistency implies that phantom feasts are not purely subjective experiences, but interact with the external environment in ways that are difficult to explain. The concept of liminal spaces also plays a role in understanding phantom feasts. Dining halls, kitchens, and banquet rooms exist at the intersection of utility and ceremony. They are designed for communal interaction, ritual, and shared experience. These spaces, particularly when abandoned or altered, may become focal points for residual energy. The architecture itself, long tables, polished surfaces, warm lighting, amplifies the sensory echoes, providing a stage for manifestations that engage all five senses. Observers are drawn into the stage, becoming unwitting participants in a performance of memory and emotion. Folklore offers additional insight, with stories of spectral meals appearing during specific times or under certain conditions. Some legends associate phantom feasts with moral lessons, warning against greed, neglect, or disrespect for hospitality. Others suggest that these banquets occur to honor lost souls, a form of commemoration, repeated across generations. In each case, the feast embodies a connection between the living and the dead, inviting participants to witness, partake, or reflect. The phenomenon serves as both cautionary tale and bridge, preserving cultural and emotional continuity. Many paranormal researchers emphasize the sensory completeness of phantom feasts. Unlike typical apparitions, these manifestations engage sight, sound, smell, and even touch. Witnesses often report feeling the warmth of plates, the weight of tankards, and the subtle movement of objects in response to their actions. The interplay of these sensory elements reinforces the realism of the experience, making it one of the most immersive forms of haunting. The ghostly banquet is not merely observed, it is experienced in a manner that resonates on a profoundly human level. The enduring mystery of phantom feasts lies in their intersection of memory, emotion, and ritual. They challenge our understanding of time and presence, suggesting that moments of intense human connection may echo long after the participants have departed. Scholars continue to debate whether these experiences are primarily psychological, energetic, or supernatural, yet the accounts remain strikingly consistent. Each phantom feast is a testament to the enduring power of shared meals, the resonance of human emotion, and the subtle, persistent ways the past can reach into the present. The lingering allure of phantom feasts often lies in their ability to evoke both nostalgia and unease. Witnesses describe a simultaneous sense of comfort and disorientation, as if stepping into a memory that is not entirely their own. The food appears impossibly fresh, the air warm and filled with aromas that trigger instinctive reactions. Silverware clinks in rhythm with faint laughter, yet no one is visible. Chairs shift gently to accommodate unseen diners, and plates seem to anticipate the observer's movements. This paradox of presence and absence is at the heart of what makes phantom feasts so compelling and so difficult to explain. Some theorists propose that the phenomenon may function as a temporal mirror, reflecting moments that were significant to the original participants. The energy of intense emotion, joy, grief, celebration, or longing may become embedded in the space where the meal occurred. When the right conditions are met, these moments re-emerge, creating a sensory impression of the event that is so complete it can feel interactive. Observers are not just passive witnesses, they are drawn into the rhythm, participating in a ritual that continues beyond the boundaries of time. Anthropological perspectives offer insight into why meals, in particular, might generate such persistent echoes. Food has long been a medium of connection, a ritualized act that binds communities and families together. Banquets are more than sustenance. They are ceremonies of shared existence, often accompanied by storytelling, music, toasts, and laughter. When these rituals are disrupted by sudden death, abandonment, or disaster, the unfinished act may leave an imprint that endures in the environment. Those who later encounter a phantom feast become temporary participants in a ceremony that never reached its conclusion. Parapsychologists point to the role of residual energy, suggesting that high-intensity emotional events can leave lasting impressions on the physical environment. A lively dinner, a family reunion, or a celebration of victory could all generate energy strong enough to resonate across decades or centuries. The manifestation of a phantom feast could be seen as the environment replaying these moments, a projection of energy that engages multiple senses simultaneously. This might explain why witnesses often report consistent details: the smell of freshly baked bread, the warmth of roasted meats, the precise arrangement of cutlery, and even the subtle movements of invisible diners. Some accounts hint at the presence of conscious intention behind the apparitions. Observers describe tables subtly adjusting to their presence, glasses tilting for a toast, and utensils shifting in response to their actions. This interaction suggests that phantom feasts may not be purely residual, but could also involve spirits or energies with awareness. It is as if the banquet itself recognizes the observer, inviting them to engage, honoring their participation, and completing a ritual that has persisted beyond death. Cultural lore provides another layer of interpretation. In various societies, spectral meals are tied to lessons, warnings, or commemorations. Some legends describe ghostly banquets that appear to teach humility, caution against greed, or preserve traditions of hospitality. In other tales, the feast honors lost ancestors, allowing descendants and visitors alike to witness and acknowledge those who have passed. The phantom banquet becomes a bridge between the living and the dead, a ritualized event that carries meaning and continuity across generations. The immersive quality of phantom feasts is remarkable. Unlike many other types of hauntings, these events engage multiple senses, creating a fully embodied experience. Witnesses often report feeling warmth from plates, the subtle weight of utensils, the gentle pressure of chairs shifting, and even the movement of invisible hands arranging food. The combination of smell, taste, and sound with the visual and tactile elements makes the experience exceptionally convincing. It is not simply seeing a ghostly table. It is entering a living memory that engages the observer in profound ways. Historians examining the locations of reported phantom feasts frequently uncover patterns. Many occur in grand dining halls, manor houses, or inns with long histories of communal dining. Others are reported aboard ships, where the communal nature of mealtime and the abrupt absence of crews due to tragedy may create conditions for energy to imprint. These settings share a commonality. They are spaces designed for ritual, connection, and social bonding. The architecture, combined with the emotional resonance of the events, amplifies the likelihood that a phantom banquet will manifest. Some researchers also emphasize the psychological dimension, noting that anticipation, context, and suggestion play crucial roles. A person entering a reputedly haunted dining hall may unconsciously heighten their sensory perception, detecting subtleties that others might ignore. Yet the consistency of independent accounts suggests that these experiences are not purely subjective. Repeated reports of specific details, the arrangement of chairs, the smell of particular foods, the sound of clinking utensils, point to a phenomenon that interacts with the environment in ways that defy simple explanation. Ultimately, phantom feasts challenge our understanding of time, memory, and presence. They reveal how human rituals, particularly those surrounding food and communal gatherings, carry profound emotional and cultural significance that can transcend the ordinary boundaries of life and death. Theories behind these apparitions continue to evolve, blending anthropology, parapsychology, folklore, and psychology. Yet each encounter offers a strikingly tangible glimpse into the persistence of human connection. The Phantom Feast stands as a testament to the enduring power of shared meals, memory, and the invisible threads that link the living and the departed across generations. The final explanation of phantom feasts often turns to the subtle interplay of energy, emotion, and human perception. In many reports, witnesses describe the uncanny feeling of being acknowledged by the invisible diners, as though their presence is sensed and welcomed into the ritual. A plate may tilt slightly toward them, a tankard may wobble in response to their hand, and the faint aroma of freshly cooked food may intensify just as they lean closer. These nuances suggest that the banquet is not a simple replay of a moment in time, but a living, reactive experience, a bridge between the energy of those long past and the consciousness of the present observer. Some theorists suggest that the act of communal dining itself is inherently powerful, capable of imprinting long-lasting traces upon a location. Meals involve ritual, communication, and shared emotion in a concentrated way. Laughter, toasts, debates, celebrations, and even arguments occur around the table, leaving a layered tapestry of energy. When these interactions are abruptly interrupted by tragedy, abandonment, or sudden loss, the residual imprint is stronger, more likely to manifest as what witnesses perceive as a phantom feast. The ghostly banquet, then, is not simply a replay of physical events, but an echo of emotion, ceremony, and memory fused into a tangible sensory experience. Accounts of phantom feasts often highlight the paradox of familiarity and strangeness. Observers feel both a comforting sense of inclusion and an underlying awareness that they are not alone in a conventional sense. The table is set, the food is placed, the clinking of utensils fills the air, yet no living being sits among them. This duality, presence and absence coexisting, creates a unique tension that is both haunting and enthralling. It draws participants into the ritual while simultaneously reminding them of the mystery that surrounds it. Many cultures recognize the spiritual significance of meals, offering food to ancestors or departed loved ones as a means of maintaining connection. Anthropologists argue that phantom feasts may be an extension of this ancient practice, where the ritual of shared dining continues beyond death, independent of the living's intentional participation. The echoes of these feasts could represent the lingering energy of respect, remembrance, and communion, creating experiences that are felt vividly across time. Witnesses are not merely seeing or imagining, they are participating in a symbolic act that has been maintained for generations. The psychological aspect of phantom feasts cannot be ignored. Expectation, suggestion, and heightened sensory awareness contribute to the experience, allowing observers to perceive subtle cues that would otherwise go unnoticed. Yet the remarkable consistency of reports, often from strangers unaware of prior accounts, suggests that there is more than perception at play. The arrangement of plates, the smell of particular foods, and the timing of ethereal sounds frequently match across multiple witnesses. These consistencies point to a phenomenon that interacts with the observer, creating a shared, immersive encounter with the echoes of past human gathering. Phantom feasts also illuminate a deep human longing for connection. Meals have always been central to social life, providing comfort, community, and continuity. The lingering presence of these banquets may serve as a reminder that bonds forged through shared sustenance endure beyond life. The invisible diners, whether the product of residual energy, spirit, or temporal resonance, invite participation, offering a glimpse of continuity in a world often defined by impermanence. Each encounter reinforces the idea that human connection, celebrated, mourned, or remembered through food, is a force powerful enough to transcend time. In examining phantom feasts, one cannot overlook the role of ritual in creating these experiences. Rituals of preparation, presentation, and consumption concentrate emotional energy in a way that makes locations particularly susceptible to such phenomena. From manor houses and inns to ship's galleys and family dining rooms, the intensity of emotion during shared meals is captured in the space itself. When observed centuries later, these rituals manifest as a banquet that engages the senses fully, a vivid recreation that invites participation while simultaneously evoking awe and wonder. Stories of ghostly dinners leave us with both fascination and reflection. They remind us that meals are more than acts of survival. They are ceremonies of human connection, memory, and emotion. Phantom feasts, whether interpreted as echoes of energy, spiritual communion, or the interplay of mind and environment, demonstrate the enduring power of these rituals. Witnesses are offered a fleeting glimpse into a timeless banquet, a moment where past and present converge around a table set with care, where invisible hands offer sustenance, and where human presence, however ephemeral, is honored. As we conclude this exploration of the phantom feast, we are left with a sense of reverence for the subtle, enduring threads that link life, memory, and ritual. The ghostly banquet is not simply an apparition, it is a testament to the social, emotional, and spiritual significance of shared meals. It reminds us that moments of joy, sorrow, and connection can echo far beyond their original time, awaiting those willing to witness, partake, and honor the legacy of human interaction. The empty tables, the clinking silverware, the scent of freshly prepared dishes, all serve as enduring symbols of memory, continuity, and the invisible threads that connect us across generations. With each phantom feast, we are invited to participate in a ritual that is at once haunting and comforting, a bridge between the living and the departed. These spectral banquets endure as reminders of the profound importance of shared meals, of the bonds forged through food, conversation, and presence. They whisper to us across time, asking only that we listen, observe, and acknowledge the delicate, timeless dance of memory and spirit that continues to fill empty rooms with invisible life.